Hello, this is Max Drake. I want to talk to you about the second API that I was dealing with. Now, this one I ended up doing first, and the first API that I did with the videos, the first 4 videos, were about the more simple one. But I thought I'd start from the simple one and then come on to the more complicated one, although I dealt with them in a different way around. This one had a lot more restraints on it, and I really want to talk about those restraints or step through how I sort of found out about those restraints. So first of all, I wasn't really aware of the time shift. So the first time I actually ran these things, I was just getting the New Zealand time and suddenly saying go and sending it over, getting the data back again, and then suddenly finding that I had sunshine in the middle of the night at 12 o'clock, and I was suddenly thinking something's a bit whacked here. So then I actually found that I actually had to do the shift of the time frames and do stuff like that. So that was a whole different exercise that I had to deal through. There was over 1,800 sensors, and the only way that I could, there was no documentation on the sensors. They just said they were there, and they didn't actually say whether they were active or whether they were dummy. So I think they had a template that they actually used for people's setups in their grow houses, and then they just plug in the sensors that they actually need. So the only way that you could do it was to actually run through all the sensors at something like in the middle of the day, or maybe 11 o'clock in the day, and then you do it in the middle of the night, because some might be night sensors like lights coming on, so you didn't really know. So, and then you could gather back. So of those 1,800 ones, there was about 60 I think, that actually had responses coming back. So we then isolated those, and we said, no, which ones would you want? And some of them were something like the fan turning on and off or something like that. We said, no, those weren't interested. Let's have the temperature ones. So we identified 16 sensors that we actually did, and we focused on those sensors through there. Now, when I was doing this, I found the documentation was a little bit unclear as to what happens. And this is something, is there a restriction on the amount of API calls and things that you can actually make? And this one did have a whole lot of restrictions. Now, the other one I talked about, and we'll talk about that shortly, had different restrictions. Now, this one has, it's a daily refresh, daily data refresh at 0-100. So it's 0-100 UTC. So at Greenwich Mean Time at at midnight, that's the next day. And I have got a 5-day history. So this put pressure on me straight away, is that I can only grab things from 5 days previously. If it was beyond 5 days, I couldn't get anything. So I then had to have something up and running just so that I could get data in, and then we can start building a history up there of what we can going forward. So I needed something running quite quickly. So that was putting a bit of pressure on me there. The second one was that I can only do 2 calls in 5 minutes. Now, this is the lowest end of the API calls that this particular company offers. And if you wanted more, you could get more calls, maybe 4 calls in 5 minutes, and then you got 25 days history, and that was one cost level, and then there was other cost levels going up. And they said, well, let's just see what they didn't really know anything about what was coming through, so we said, well, let's just see what we could grab, and then we go from there. So we started off on this minimum one through here, and it put these restraints on there. So I can only make an API call every 2.5 minutes, and I've only got 5 days history to actually go back and grab. So I started to do a little bit of math through here. So the other one that we did, the first API, we were doing a call every hour throughout the day. So we're doing 24 calls in a day. For each sensor. Now their sensors was not a sensor, it was actually a controller. Now a lot of the controllers, when we got there, which controller, so there's the ones which actually had humidity and temperature, and then there was the liquid ones. And generally, when we had a call, they came back with 4 things, like the humidity, the temperature, the lighting, and something else. So they came back, so one API request actually brought you back 5 bits of data, so equivalent of 5 sensors from one call. And so there was 3 sensors there, so we actually made 72 calls. Now that one we're allowed to do 2 million calls a day. So we're well within the range of what they offer. So they seem to be comfortable. Either there isn't a big demand for their API, or so they're suddenly saying, no, use it as you will. If there's too much demand, then we'll start being a bit more restricted. But at this point in time, it's not an issue. So use it as you will. This other one, though, they seem to have a bit of restriction. So the idea behind the 2.5 minutes or 5 minutes and only 2 API calls is that you're not overloading this server demanding all this information. Now, at the same point in time, they are displaying that data. They're projecting out to dashboards and for apps on the phones for people to look up. So there's people who are actively looking up this stuff, so that has to be fed out via an API for those sorts of things. So I ended up this thing here, and I said, well, okay, then we've got 16 sensors. We want a call every hour, so that's 24. And so if I multiply that by that, I need to do 384 API calls if I was just asking for an individual sensor at a specific time each time. So if I multiply that by 2.5 minutes, then I'm going to have to do, it's going to take 960 minutes to do, and if I divide that by 60, it's going to take 16 hours to make a request for all of those 384 API calls. So I've got to run that script for 16 hours. What's my limitation? So there's 24 hours in a day. I can make 2.5 call every 2.5 minutes, and if I've got 60 minutes, that's 24 calls in an hour. So I've got 24 times 24, so the maximum number of calls I can make in a day is 576. So my 384 is within the 576, so I can do that, but I've got to run my script for 16 hours. So that means if I was doing it from my PC, I've got to have my PC running for 16 hours and not turn that script off. It's got to run in the background for all the time, otherwise if it breaks, you're going to have some problems. So if I run that script on my server, that's running 24 hours a day, it can just run it, and I just kind of keep it in the background so I don't actually interrupt it at all. And unless the server goes down, that can actually run, and then I can trigger it each day, and it just runs and does it. So I was suddenly thinking, well, okay then, that's feasible to do, but it's a long-running script. And when I looked at the thing further on, it suddenly says you can do 50 data points per call. So that means each API call you can get 50 sensors. Well, so that means that I can actually cram all of my 16 sensors into that one API call. So we can say the data point is that, and give me the start time and the end point, and it give it for all of those 16 sensors all in one wallop. So suddenly, if we go back to the math on there, instead of 16 times a call, I'm actually just doing one, and I'm getting 16 sensors worth of data back. So that's only going to take me 24 API calls. So 24 API calls at 2.5 minutes an API call, and divide that, multiply it by 60 or whatever, or divide by 60, it's basically an hour. So I can actually make all of those calls that I want for the 16 sensors, or even up to 50 sensors at this point in time, and I can get them all within an hour. So that's with these pulls of 2.5 minutes through there. Oh, so that's a lot better. So suddenly I'm well within the range of what I need to do through here. And then if there's other sensors, and when I actually identify the sensors, there's another 36 or something that are gathering data, so I need to start testing those. I can easily do that within that, so I can actually just pack them into one specific API call. So I'm comfortable. I'm in my range of this. So that's quite good up to a point. But then the next little challenge comes through when we go through and look at this. The other one, when we were looking at the first API, you give them your client API key, and you say which controller ID, you've got those two together. So it says, does this controller belong to this person's ID? So that's my API access key. And he says, yeah, that belongs to them. So, okay then, it reads the access key and it says, yeah, that controller belongs to him, give me the data. So it then allows that information, that API call, to return something. With this process, this uses tokens. Now, the way that tokens work is that you are given a secret key and you go and request an access token. So what does that mean? So if we come to the script here, what that does is, where's that gone? Access token. If we come into here for an access token through here, we're just going, so it's basically an API call, and we're giving it our client access key, and we put in our client access key, and it gives us a token back. And that token is valid for an hour. So therefore, after an hour, that expires. So even if I've got, I'm doing API calls, it expires, so it just won't let me do. So it's sort of like, it's a limiter for what you can do within a certain period of time. So what I've then got to do is I've got to go and ask for an access key. So then I can run this one here. So if I just run this script through here and run that one, it'll run through, and there is my access token through there. Boom. So I've got to give that, and it's valid for 3,600 seconds, so 1 hour. So after an hour, now this is where I've got this dilemma, is that if I do 24 API calls, it's going to take me 1 hour. So it's going to take me 365 seconds if I'm using 2.5 minutes each one. So there's potential that my token could expire before I get my last thing. So it could, it could take a little bit longer, or the access token, it might have taken 5 seconds or something to get the access token before I can run it. And it's a bit too late for the last one. So I didn't want that to happen. So I suddenly thought, well, okay, then we'll go and ask for an access token. We'll run half of it, so we'll go from 0 hours, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 11. And then we'll stop. And then we go and get another access token, and then we'll run from 12 o'clock through to 23 hours, to 11 o'clock at night. So that's what I decided to do. So we just do the same process twice, so we only use half an hour of the first token and half an hour of the second token. So we know that we're not going to run out of time. So that's what I ended up doing through here. So that was to actually make sure that this token, and this was the thing, as I was testing this, I needed a valid token so that I could do the test to see whether it was actually meeting what it was trying to do. That sometimes it would break in the middle, and I suddenly, is that my code's wrong? And you're suddenly thinking, no, the access token's expired. So I ended up with a very simple test. So I found the simplest one, which is basically it goes and says, is there an endpoint? Is there a greenhouse or something at the end of that based on the code of the access point and this code or this user ID through there? And so that's what I do through there. So this one prints the token, and then it says it's a greenhouse and it's connected true. So it's saying, yeah, that access token is actually working. So we know that's good. So that's the next bit that we do. So here we come through into here on this first one through here. And we got an access token. We do a call. Then we actually that ends. Then we do the first API call, and this one loops through from 8 hours in the range of 12. So it only does from 0 up to 11. And if it's less than 10, then we add the 0 on the end through there, and it runs through that one there of the start and the finish. And then we come through, stop at that point in time. And each time we're pausing 155 seconds. Now I think 2.5 minutes is 150 seconds, so we've added another 5 seconds onto that. So we're going to over exceed the hour anyway, but that doesn't matter because we're only doing it for half an hour. Then we go and get a second access token, and I've made sure that I've named this access token 2, so that this second part is not reading the first access token and then suddenly errors out on that one because that one's expired and this one's still running. And then I go through from 0 to the range 12, but I say whatever the hour is here, if that's 0 hours, then I go at plus 12, so that it's now 12, and so as it goes through and counts from 0 up to 11, this will count through 0 to 11 plus 12 each time, so we're going to end up with 12, 1, 2, 3, 12, 13, 14, 15, right up to 23. And it goes through and does the payload and all of that each time. So that's how we're managing that particular one, and then we're writing the information to a file, and then we're also putting the brackets so that we actually get a proper JSON through there. So a couple of things that we do. The first time I ran this, I ended up stuffing up, so because I didn't do the time shift. So they seem to have everything stored on their computer on the server at UTC, so it's universal time back there. So I've got to move between the time zones. So this is dealing with time. In the previous one we were using Unix time, so we took our date and time and then we converted it to Unix. So there's only one unit, which is seconds, so the number of seconds since the 1st of January 1970, and then we convert it back to a date time. This one stays in a date time, but we shift it to the time zones. and I found a little formula somewhere, and so this was a little function that I found somewhere that would do this shift. So here's an example. Between UTC and Europe Paris, there's a 2-hour difference. So it'll actually work these things out. So this is the way that it does it. So you actually give it the UTC, the thing. Now the way that it describes it, you have different zones. So you've got Europe. For New Zealand, you actually have, this is Pacific, and then it has the city Auckland. So that's how it actually gets this. So we're at the moment 13. So that's where we're getting the so it uses the time zones to actually calculate the difference through there. So I've got a formulaic way of doing that to do it. So you can use this anywhere in the world for the stuff to do it. So I've just kept that as a separate, and it uses this p pi tz for the pi time zones for doing it. So that's the library that it's using to actually do that calculation. So I don't know what I'm doing there. So we're doing that. So we call that through there. Sorry, that's a microphone. Sorry, I've got too many things open through here. So in that one there, we're shifting the date. So we're suddenly saying, what's the day that you want? This is what I want, which is yesterday, this time here, and then it shifts it back to UTC, and then it shifts it back to UTC, and then gets the data, and then it brings it back. So and it goes through the cycle for doing those sorts of things there. So let's just run that one there, and the other key point in this is that I'm using the import time, which I think is part of things, so you don't have to bring it in a separate library, is that after each loop we pause, and so that time sleep, so all that does is it just stops the script in the middle. It doesn't, it just pauses it for that period of time, and then it carries on to the next part of the thing that it's going through, and that one's in the middle of the loop. And I do a print I, so I can see which iteration I am. So I'm 1, 2, 3 right the way through to 23, so I can come and check on the thing to see that it's actually running and working through the process that it's supposed to do there. So if I just run that now, it'll there's the access token that we've got. And then the second part that it does is going to wait a few seconds. I think it waits 30 seconds. And then it gives us, it goes and gets the first request. So if I just grab that request through there, copy, and I go into the JSON, and if I just refresh that through there so we're blank, and if I paste that JSON in there, it's a perfectly formed JSON, and I've got all my data coming through here. Hooray, hooray. And I've got 16 rows total, because I've got 60 data points or whatever. Oh yeah, the 60 data points. But you see, some of them I've got more than one result. So I've got a measurement of 273 and 275 on this one and 74. So that means these are within the interval between the start and finish, of which I've got an interval through here of 1.5 minutes. So it starts at 1 second past the hour, and it goes through to 1 minute 30. So within that interval, sometimes those things I'm getting two, and sometimes I'm not getting other ones. So this is one of the things that we're going to follow through here. So it'll iterate through, so it's iterating here one, now it's going to wait 2.5 minutes, and then it'll go through the next one and do the next one, and then do the pause and stuff like that. So we just stop that at this point in time. We can see what it's doing, but we don't want to sit here for an hour to watch the whole thing go through. Once we get that data, we've then got to do a couple of things with it. In here, this next part of the script, I'm actually going to take that file. So I've now got a file here, which is the result of what we've got through here. So at this point in time, the previous file that I've got through here for the getting the census and the token and stuff, that won't work. I'll leave the file in there, but you can see the structure of how I've actually put it all together, but it won't work because I haven't given you my addresses or URLs or anything, or my Clark keys or secret keys or whatever they call them through there. from here on in, you can actually use the rest of them. So from number 4, you can actually use this JSON file, which is the download, to actually follow on through the rest of the steps through here. So with the JSON file through here, what we do is that we we upload the data, and we get the data into here, and we're pulling it in as a JSON format. We explode all the data and the things like that, and then we pop and we do all sorts of things so that we get it into a CSV format. Then once we've got it into the CSV, well, it's in a format where we can push it out to a CSV, but we're in a data frame. And what we do is we do our shift back. So we're now taking our data frame and going from time UTC to Pacific Auckland time. So we're now taking from Greenwich Mean Time, and we're moving it forward 12 or 13 hours or whatever one we're actually doing. And then we're writing it out to a file. So we're then writing it to a second data frame, just printing the head here so that we know what we've got, and then we're writing to a CSV. So if we just do that one there, and we just go shift and run, and there we are. So if we just do a quick refresh, no, it's still running. We should, no, it's there. So if we do a refresh, we've got our CSV there through there. So here's our CSV. We've got I think this is the index of which hour it's going through, so that should go through to something like 23 or 24. 23, yeah. So we're going from there. So this one here is the hour that it's actually doing. Here's the sensor that we've got, which is in blue. We've got the data sensor. Now look at here in the data that we're getting. This is at 1 minute 16. This is at 58 seconds. This is at 1 minute 16. So all of them, the date time is not on the hour. And we're getting some results, and some of them have got very long things, so we most probably have to round some of those up as well. And then you see we've got some gaps in the data. So this one here, we've got no date time on it. We've got no value, and we've got no, I think they're supposed to be what is it, not the value, the value type. I thought it was going to be units, but it's not. But I've got a whole load of empty ones. Now, later on I tried to re-upload this information, and it got all shirty with me, so I ended up having to clean out all of these empty rows through here. So I ended up creating, so this is why I got a 5A and a 5B, because 6 was uploading, and so I just only had this range inside here. So I ended up doing this one that could do, I think on here it actually runs, but I was having a bit of a bug on one of the other ones. So this one, I just upload it as per, I upload it as per this file here, and then I write back to the same file. So I upload it, put it into a data frame, and I use this drop NA. That means if there's an NA, if you see in the field down at the bottom here, there's a few NAs. Now this says drop NA with the threshold 3. So if I've got an NA in here somewhere, and there's only 2 NA, and the last one actually has something, it won't drop that line. But if there's 3 NAs, so I've set a threshold of 3 NAs. So that means I've got the sensor, but I've got no date, no value, and no value type. So if there's nothing there at all, then delete that line. So it will delete these last 4 lines down here because there's nothing there at all. So if I now run this script here, prior to running that script, if I just come through and look at this, in here, I've got about 539 rows of data. Now when I clean this out with all of these empty gaps through here, and if I come through and now, sorry, that's 4, I need 5A. If I now run that one there, shift run, you will now find in that particular file there, I've only got 427. So I've gone from 539 to 427. So I've lost about 20% of my data. Oh, sorry, of the sensors. So the sensor's only returning 4/5 of the data. So there's some missing. So maybe my request period of 1.5 minutes is too narrow. maybe I need to widen that up to actually capture those sensors, because those same sensors are reading on other periods. They're just missing out on these ones. So why are they missing out on these ones? Maybe each one is slightly out of sync, and as it moves through, it just moves through that the sensor's reading at 1 minute 31 seconds, and it just is outside the range and doesn't read. So I need to reflect on this. It's only while doing this video that I realised that this was actually happening. So we're still out of sync. We're still getting all of these numbers which aren't aligned. So the next part of the process that we actually have to do is part 3, which is the resampling. So the first thing that we do is that we change our timestamp, which is in this 24/12/02 and all of this, into an actual date time. So we can actually do date manipulation stuff with it, so that we can say add 3 minutes, might subtract 2 minutes, or do something like that with them. Whereas the timestamp, as it is here, is just a string, so it's not usable. So we're converting that to a timestamp, and we're saying what the format looks like, and we're bringing it into here, and then we start doing a bit of jiggery pokery. Now then we're grouping by the variable ID, so we're grouping everything to do with each particular sensor, and then we're resampling to the mean. So whereas we had on the ones that we saw at the top of the head of the other one, that we had 2 results for the same sensor in the same period, it would add those 2 together and divide them, and then we'd round it, and at this point in time we're rounding to 2 decimal, because some of ours we ended up with 7 or 8 decimal places, which we didn't really want. So first of all, that we're just doing the resampling, and then we're resampling to the hour, so that we know we're exactly on the hour. And then the second thing which I'm doing at this point in time, this is quite important as well. Here you see the sensor is on every single line, so I've got 427 lines of stuffing. Now I don't want it that way. I actually want our index to be the date, to be the time. So 0 hours, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 23. So we actually only want one of those, and whereas we got masses of these through here, I want one of those, and I actually want the column head to be the sensor. So I then have, for every single hour, I've got a result for that particular sensor. So that's where I'm doing the group by through here, and grouping by, and again I've got all these sensors which are just these really long numbers, so I've actually got to suddenly saying, well, actually that's zone 1. There's 3 zones here. Zone 1 is one room in the greenhouse, zone 2 is another room in the greenhouse, and zone 3 is the outside weather conditions that we're actually picking up. So I actually want to split these into 3 separate tables, so that I can put them into 3 tables, and so that we can just look at data relating to one grow house room, or we compare it to the outside and inside temperatures and things like that. So we can start doing that sort of comparison. So I've got to split this data in a number of ways. One, I've got to rotate it so that the index is the date, the date and the time from 0 hours up to 23 hours, and then the column has got to be this. So this is where we're doing this in place, and we're changing the column value to Z1 temp. Now each one I'm also naming the column ones, and then also if there's any gaps in the data, and I've got a feeling maybe I shouldn't be doing it here, I should be doing this maybe further on, I'm then backfilling and forward filling. I think I was getting some success out of it, but this might not be the most appropriate way. But I don't mind that, because backfilling and forward filling, and what it says is if it finds if there's an NA where you've got a column of NA, well, I'll run this first and then I can explain it better. So if I'm just going to run this one here, and it goes through all of this wonderful stuff, and here it's now split us. You can go back to you, and we just refresh that. We've now got 3 files, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and you see I've still got some empty data. Now fill, B fill and F fill. F fill is forward fill, so it takes the one from before and puts the same number in the next cell down. So it's really just filling empty cells. If there's an NA in here, it will fill it. If there's a 0, it leaves it, because that's actually a valid result. You know, like you can actually have light, and in the middle of the night there's no light coming in, and then suddenly during the day you'll get a lot of light. So having zeros is an NA, and NA is just there's nothing there. So it's supposed to fill down there. So maybe I'm not doing it, but since I'm actually just dummying data across, it's not critical if it's actually working at this point. I think I was testing it because I was getting a whole lot of empty stuff. So some of them I'm backfilling. So B fill means I take the one below and I fill above, and F fill is that I take the one above and fill the one below. So some of them I backfill and then I forward fill, and some I forward fill and then I backfill, depending on which way I'm doing it. So I've suddenly got these things split into 3 groups with the headers of, now I've got the temperature down one of the rows through there, and then this one here, you can see this one, suddenly I've got good data, and then suddenly it stops. So my humidity reading ones seem to suddenly disappear off, and all of these ones are right up at 100%, which is you know, so I suppose it's hot and there's a lot of moisture around, so it could be that level of humidity. But again, you see also I'm normalized. All of these are on the hour. So again, this data is clean enough that I can actually just go and push it up into the database. I would have preferred to have all of these filled in with the stuff, and these ones here, to the lighting ones, maybe those push through, but I'm missing some data still on them. And it's only while I'm doing this video that I'm suddenly thinking, I've got a problem here and I should be looking at a wider space, because I'm normalizing that. You know, if I got 5 results all on the same sensor in that same period, I'm still only going to get, I'm going to resample it so that it only becomes a single one, which is the mean of all of those averages. So it's worth doing some explorations. But I felt so much under pressure because I only had that 5 days backwards, that I could actually grab information. Which brings me to the last point that I want to bring up here. Now all of these, each of these I've kind of focused on each individual one as a separate exercise. So I've said, okay, then now I've got to take this from a JSON format and convert it into a CSV. So I've done that, so that's that part of the code. I'll write it out to a file, then the next one I'll do the next bit, and then I'll do that. And each one I sort of focused on its end. And what actually happens is when I joined all of these together, so I wanted an automation and I wanted to do all of the thing. So when I did the sampling, so what I did was I joined number 2, number 4, number 5, number 5A and number 5B all together, and then I put emails together. So I joined them all together in this one here called to multi-sensor and token. And now you'll see it's a very long script because it goes from the very beginning, and right at the very end I've got 3 emails being sent out to people for what we're doing. So this is just join them all together. But this is the danger of the join, which I just want to bring a point with. At the end of item 4, I finished with a data frame. So I got this thing called a data frame, and I've got this second one called data frame 2. And then I write data frame 2 out to a file. So when 5B or 5A or 5B, I then read that file back in again. So this is where I got caught out, and it caused me a bit of angst. So here we are, just ignore those 2 dells at the moment. This is where 4 finishes, and on number 5 I've got a DF here again. And what was happening is it wasn't reading the file. I'd miswritten the coding for it. So it wasn't picking up this file, it was taking the DF from 4 through here and carrying on processing. And what was happening is I was getting this strange data, like I was getting 150% humidity, which you can't have, you can only have 100%. And it was only later that I realised that, and I suddenly thought, I can't remember, it was a week or 10 days or 20 days or something like that of data that I'd suddenly realised. I pushed up into the database and I'd realised what this error was, or somebody picked it up and things like that, and I suddenly thought, I'm mogadored. But in the end, what I found was actually if I delete those, so at the end of that, I've written it to the file and then I delete those. So I can't, so sorry, what was happening? if this just didn't read this and these were named differently, it would just break, and so I wouldn't get anything in results. So as soon as I didn't get anything in results, I could go and explore, and I'm suddenly saying there's something there that's broken and it's not actually going through the thing. Oh look, it's not reading that file correctly, I can go and fix that. But if I'm getting partial information back, so I'm getting a result, I assume that what's actually happened is what I thought was actually happened. But when I was getting all these sensors all out of range, I thought, I've really stuffed up. And then I identified where this happened. I was in a bit of a panic over the whole thing. And then I found a couple of solutions to doing that, and then also trying to rename. So this is the issue here, where instead of using a different naming it, like I've gone to 2 instead of going for data frame 3, data frame 4, data frame 5, data frame 6 or something like that, so that there was never going to be a conflict between the naming conventions between the different files, as I just added them together and I didn't look at the code overall, that wouldn't have occurred. But because I was just slapping things together and just trying to get something to run, and something ran, I didn't really think about it. And then I thought, oh dear, we've really stuffed out. But in fact, when I reflected, first of all, I fixed it, so I made sure that going forward, everything was running smoothly. And then I suddenly thought, we're going to have to throw away all that data. And then I thought, well, no, we don't. One of the things of actually writing things out to a file means that I've got the historic information. So I've got the original API call, and I've also got the original CSV file. And then I've also got these ones here, which are the resultant ones that are getting pushed up to things. So I started thinking, well, actually, I can come back to here and I can now do the post-processing on that, and then I'll get the data clean. And when I did that, all the data came through clean again. And so I just had to blow away the dates in the database and put in the new stuff so that it was actually cleaned up and all quite nicely done. So I was able to retrieve the situation from a drop ball. So I was quite pleased with that, the fact that I'd actually retained all of this information. Which brings me on to the second point. At this point in time, I'm sort of running to catch up with a whole lot of other parts of this project. Just grabbing the data is one part, and then there's processing and presenting and doing things and cross-matching and getting queries in the table and doing a lot of other things. This is really substantiating information, and we're going through and developing what we want to do with it, and what queries and what questions to actually ask, to actually how to interrogate, to actually see, because the whole objective of this at the end of the day, the data is there to see if we can actually improve the growing or enhance the growing or do it more effectively or more efficiently. So it's a means to an end, and this was just a means, and I just needed something to actually grab the data at this point in time. And suddenly realised we had all these other sensors that we had, but we didn't know whether they were useful or not. So the best thing to do is I just said, I'm now just going to run them. I'm going to put them in another file. I'm going to run them on a trigger every day, and they're going to write a JSON file. I'll deal with them later and go through. Once I've got a reasonable data set, I'll go through and see if I've got to do all of this post-processing through here and structure the data in a way and see which zones they relate to, and then we can do it. But at this point in time, I can just do the capturing of the data. So I'd actually jumping around through all of these things and trying to do too many things at once, and this is where the errors were creeping in. And again, part of the process is I'm sort of doing the programming, and I don't actually have an understanding of what the data means. So I need certain other experts to tell me what they need me to do to display. And when I display things, they kind of say, oh, look, that's wrong. And then you're suddenly thinking, oh dear, I better go and fix that, or find out about it. I said, well, I'm just taking raw data and throwing it at you. It hasn't got a meaning for me. So you've got to explain to me what, or interpret what that's supposed to mean. And so this is where they were saying, look, you've got sunshine in the middle of the night. You're suddenly thinking, oops, I've got to do that time shift. So I was running to catch up, and at this point in time, there's these other 36 sensors, so I'm just running them. And I'm not doing anything with them at this point in time, but I'm gathering the information because I've only got that moving 5-day window to capture that information. So I want to capture it as early as possible so that we can build up a depth of information, and then later on, I can, whatever I process and do with it later down here, I can actually retrospectively take it back to these other ones. So that's one thing that I just want to point out. The second thing with this is now that I've looked at this data, I'm missing 20% of it. Now, the same sensors are giving me data further along. They're giving me data in the middle, so I'm missing data in some of these areas. I'm missing data all over the place. So obviously I think my time frame is a bit too narrow, so I need to stretch that out. So I need to set up some other examples of this. Now, because I've got 576 API calls and I'm only doing 24 API calls, I can actually set up a couple of more instances of this exact same thing, but instead of only calling for 1.5 minutes, I can call one for 5 minutes and I can call another one for 10 minutes. And I can actually just see and run a couple of tests on a couple of those, just have them running in the background and just gathering the data. And then later on I can actually do a comparison of those and suddenly saying, well, actually, a 7-minute window is about the most effective, is because the speed of the processing and all of that. 7 minutes actually gets us all of those, and basically we got 90% rather than what did I say? We got 3/4 of no, I've got 4/5, so I'm missing 20%. So I've got 80. So I've got 80%, so if I can get up to about 90%, well, that's an extra 10%, or maybe I can actually get 95% or something. So I need to just play around and do those sorts of things. So this has been taken me a long while to get my head around all of these constraints, and each constraint I've sort of been doing it reactively. So it's sort of like I could manage the first one, and yes, if I've got 16, I can run a script to do it over 16 hours. So I'm in that time range. Oh, look, I can improve that. I can actually get it down to only doing it in an hour. Then I can do the next one. And so it's sort of like too busy reacting to things rather than retrospectively. So it's only retrospectively now I can suddenly say, oh, look, I've got these other opportunities. So I've got all this extra time that I can be doing these other tests to see if I can get a more effective API capture than what I've got at present. So, and as I said, the concern of why I'm actually doing the video now before I've got it, people give you these wonderful finished things, is that I'm moving on to so many different things at this point in time, and there's a lot of learning. I'm learning a whole lot of things about the SQL databases and calculated fields and views and so there's a few other ones. You can time the scripts so that they activate at certain periods of time and do certain things. I'm sort of doing that learning, and I'm sort of forgetting that there was an awful lot of learning here that I want to capture as well. So I hope this has been of help to you. I'll put all the files up there, and I'll put all the output paths, and there'll be the JSON file there that you can actually just run through. So you can run through item 4, 5, 5b. 6 is pretty much the same as what it was on the other one, so there's nothing. This particular 6, I've got it set up for all 3 different tables for pushing up, but in fact I would have split them out individually so that they would go up and then send an email back. So if any of them failed, you could identify which one straight away, but I talked about it in the previous email. So I hope that's of interest to you. It is an actual working project that it's working on, and it's dealing with all these extraneous stuff. And what I find is I've got the basic concept of going and getting the API call. That's fine. It's all the fiddly stuff around, of shifting the time back in theobobs, or not getting this or not getting that, or pausing for those durations and being able to do these different pauses all the way through, or other little things like that, or something's just not right, or that thing of the DB data frame jumping across and me getting partial data that was completely erroneous. Those are the things that I find are actually taking up so much of my time. So I've had to explore so many different things in here, and I find I'm really doing. I was doing the course on data analysis or something for building construction and things like that, and throughout the course he'd given you clean data. And you suddenly think, oh, I could do this, it's dead easy. But of course you've got clean data to do with it. But when you're actually having to do the cleaning of the data yourself, you suddenly realise just how complicated it is. So this is actually a working table one that I'm doing. So thank you very much for watching.